What's good, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Over Quota. Please don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review if you haven't already. And like always, the J. David Group, which is my company, is sponsoring this podcast. We help founders and CEOs turn their startups into unicorns by introducing them to CROs and VPs of sales with track records of generating revenue, building teams, and scaling growth. This podcast is also now being sponsored by Allego. For all you sales leaders out there, have you ever absolutely nailed a sales training or had a rep who killed a presentation that you just wished you could record or should have recorded to be seen later by new hires or other members of your team? Well, that's just one of the things that Allego can do. Not only does it allow you to record your best content for practice, collaboration, and feedback, but it gives you a way to organize all of your best content in one place so it's easily accessible to help improve sales for everyone. If you want to email me Webb at the J. David Group. That's with 2 B's, so I can personally introduce you to someone that will take great care of you. Now, my guest today is DeJuan Brown. He's a senior director of global sales at Seismic. I also had the CRO of Seismic on, Ed Calnan, on episode number 1. For all of you who don't know, go back and listen to episode number 1. Seismic offers sales and marketing enablement software that lets teams find the right sales content and optimize the sales process. DeJuan is also a member and volunteer of Sales for the Culture, which is how I found him, how we met. Sales for the Culture is a communal movement of Black tech sellers for Black tech sellers. DeJuan, welcome to Over Quota.
Yeah, happy to be here, man. Thanks for having me. Any seat that Ed Calnan has sat in is an honor and a deep privilege to be in as well. So
Standing on the shoulders of giants, right?
yes, absolutely. I don't know how I'm
Absolutely.
going to shape up with.
Oh, believe me, and talking to you offline, I think you're going to do just fine.
I appreciate it.
Can't wait to get into it. Well, let's just start with what I just ended with. Tell me a little bit about Sales for the Culture and what it means to you and your role there.
Yeah, sales for the culture. I appreciate that. Sales for the culture is, as you mentioned, it's a community of Black tech sellers. In fact, it's a community to attract Black tech sellers who are not yet in sales, those who are in sales at an early stage, maybe SDRs, those who are AEs already, and those who are leaders in tech sales as Black people. So that is broken down into sub communities. And our goal really is to just attract, enable, empower, support Black tech sellers, and it's a community for us, by us, to borrow from the old FUBU commercial. But essentially, it's designed to, again, like, we really believe that sales, tech sales specifically, is a phenomenal career, and we want to share that belief and also enable and equip those that come into it. From a really transparent perspective, so that we can have a space where we can be ourselves, but also learn and teach others as well.
Yeah, and again, one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on is because somebody else had introduced me to the Slack group, and then as I mentioned when you and I first talked, I thought you were the founder of the group because you're really active in there, but you're certainly you add a lot of value, and you seem like a great leader that is certainly providing a lot of good information, and so. And what's why this in particular? Because I feel like Sales for the Culture could have gone in many different directions, right?
Sure.
In this particular case, like you said, it's tech sellers. There's something about technology and technology selling that you feel it will help empower or help people move up from their current state. Tell me a little bit about your thought process there.
Yeah, I think a part of it, and this is not me speaking for Sales for the Culture as much as it is me speaking for myself.
Mm-hmm.
I think for the most part, when I got into sales, which I'm sure we'll touch on a little bit, it was by mistake. And I entered into sales in an extraordinarily transactional role, almost an order taking role to begin with. But as I started to look over, I liked it, right? I enjoy this. And I'm really shocked that for the 8 years I've been waiting tables and bartending, I've never heard that sales was something that I could actually pivot into. And so the first part of it is that other sales roles that are non-tech, tend to have I don't want to call it a lower bar of entry, a lower barrier to entry, but it's just different qualifications that have typically been placed on those roles versus roles in the tech space. So when I first started looking, my first job was at Intuit. So my first sales job was at Intuit, which is a tech company. But even as I was at Intuit in one building where we did most of the transactional sale, non-software sales like envelopes, checks, supplies, forms, invoices, and that sort of thing, the tech sales group was in an entirely different building across the street.
Mm.
And I would always look across the street, and what I would see is like the sellers over there, they were outside, this was back in early 2000s. They're having cigarette breaks, they're talking, they're laughing, they're having fun. And I'm like, what is going on over there? And most of the people that I talked to in the division that I was in was just like, yeah, that's where they sell software. They make the big bucks. It's really hard to get over there, that sort of thing. So it always became sort of a goal or an aspiration that I didn't quite know if I'd ever be able to make it across that bridge to across the street. That, I think, is the same mentality as it relates to sales, where people are in sales roles or sales adjacent roles, have the skill set, have the aptitude, have the attitude, and just feel like tech sales is not in the cards for them. And so that's a part of it. So for me, tech sales is like, has been seen throughout my career as upper echelon, right? This is like where you want to go. This is where it's the most lucrative. You get to use much more of your skill set in this space. And so then how do you even get there if you haven't built that skill before? And a part of what I love about Sales for the Culture is we have an opportunity to help people trying to figure that out. We have an opportunity to help them articulate the great transferability of the skills that they've gained through life and work, and actually apply them to their application process to make sure that the things that matter are the things that surface to the top. So that's, in a nutshell, that's what really excites me, in part, about Sales for the Culture.
I want to explore that a little bit more, if you don't mind.
Yeah, please.
When you say great transferable, the great transferable skills that they have, what are those presumably soft skills, right, that don't show up on a resume that are transferable into this profession, tech sales?
Yeah, like when you think, and there's such a broad range of these skill sets and talents that are built up in other areas that are easily transferred into tech sales. But when you ask people like, what are the key attributes of a successful seller in tech, you hear a lot of things that are all, soft skills, basically, right? You hear grit, you hear EQ, you hear perseverance, you hear resilience. You hear these things that are really hard to put your fingers around in terms of like, what does that mean, and how do you acquire that? Well, for the longest time, the tech sales roles that I was going after when I first started trying to get into SaaS specifically, uh, those things were stated as desired traits, but in reality, what they were looking for is, we want those desired traits, but we want them as expressed and experienced in this same space, right? And so it's like, no, I got my grit because my mom was 15 when she had me. I grew up in the inner city, and I'm out of, I got out, right? And there's a perseverance, there's a grit, there's a particular mindset that it takes to come up through the community that I came up through, with a mom that was, working 3 jobs and going to school, right? There's something there. Like, so my story actually informs where a lot of the capabilities and skill sets that you hope for came from. It didn't come from, growing up at 19, getting an internship at a tech company and then learning the tech ropes. It came from life ropes, right? And so how do we actually, you take somebody who did door-to-door vacuum selling, right? Like, what in the world kind of rejection do you face on a day-to-day basis going door to door trying to sell a vacuum? And if you've done that for 2 years, then what has that built in you from an attribute perspective that is easily transferable if someone can look behind what the role was and see what the role taught? Right. So we talk about what was the process and what did you learn from the process, as opposed to where contextually were the outcomes realized. And that's super important. And so, yeah, door-to-door selling. I waited tables and bartended for 8 years. What sort of personal skill sets did I pick up in terms of engaging with different types of people? EQ, recognizing how to anticipate needs and making sure that my tables didn't ask for water to be refilled. I refilled it before it got down to the halfway mark. Or how do I actually up the ticket price by suggesting the right things at the right time? That's understanding who my buyers are. Like, there's all of these things that are wrapped up in the experiences that we have in previous roles and life that just don't get you to the interview because they don't show well on a resume. But how do you tease those experiences out so that the attributes themselves bubble to the top and not just the job title?
Why do you think that there seems to be right now, right, still a reluctance on employers' parts and hiring managers to understand and appreciate those transferable skills in traits, right? Because you're right. I mean, listen, in my seat, that's what I hear all the time, right? We want those soft skills specifically for this particular, role or
Right.
coming from this particular role, selling this kind of software. Because I feel like you're doing work on that side in terms of if I'm a candidate, if I'm someone who is, DeJuan Brown 15 years ago, let's just say 20 years ago, and, to help them transfer and communicate those skills. But how do we get folks that are making the decisions to see that as well, right?
It's a good question. Jay, like, what's easier, right? You look at a resume and it says, I spent 5 years at this tech company. I spent 4 years at this tech company. I spent 3 years at this tech company. You look at another resume that says, I spent 5 years bartending and waiting tables. I spent 2 years going door to door selling alarm systems, and I spent 3 years, in the military, right? Like, and you're a person that's sort of scanning these to see which candidate you're going to move to interview. It's harder to do the work to say, you know what, I'm gonna invite both to interview, and then I want to hear the story of both, and then I want to hear what they learned from their experiences in all of these spaces of both. Like, it's time consuming, it can be difficult, and I think that those are some of the things that make barriers for those candidates. Now, that said, a part of it may be also I don't maybe not many folks coming into the tech space for the first time from other industries or from other stages and places in life have been practiced at translating on the resume or translating in the cover letter in such a way that they would take the time to tease out these experiences and then draw lines from the experience to where they're hoping to be, or what they know about the company that they're applying for, and how the skills that they have apply to the skills that are being requested and required within the job role, within the role. And so that's a big part of it too. I had a discussion with someone probably a month ago now, who was really trying to break into the tech space and was having just extreme difficulty just getting an interview. And a lot of this was a part of it. And I said, well, look, do this. Tell me your story. Like, for real, tell me your story. Where are you from? How did you grow up? Like, what was your experience in life? What shaped your mindset and worldview today? And what experiences help contribute to who you are today? Like, and for 30 minutes, I just listened to the story. And the story was so amazing. Like, it basically was a chronicle of an overcomer, right? In a nutshell. And it was just like, okay, wow, let's start from the beginning and let's talk about each of these pieces. So I kind of outlined some pillars from the story that I heard. And I said, look, here are the pillars that I heard. From those pillars, tell me what you learned at each of these stages. And everything that was articulated from, this is what I learned about myself, this is what I learned about others, this is what I learned about navigating rough scenarios, this is what I learned about rejection. From those perspectives, now we can take terms. Okay, so what is that called? Right? That's called this. What is that called? That's called this. Okay, what is that called? That's called this. You have a life of experience navigating in such a way that you've gained great skill sets in this, and this. Now we need to make that clear on the resume, make that clear on the application. So that's just an example.
You mentioned stories, which I want to get into in a moment because it's fascinating. Just listening to how you use stories, frankly, to sell and to motivate and to coach. But sticking with this for a minute, when you were in a hiring capacity, whether at Bloomberg or Intuit, what was your remit in that position? In other words, were you open to, or were you able to consider candidate A who has it on paper, and then candidate B who doesn't have it on paper? And is that how you decided to hire, if you were able to do that?
Yeah. So a part of it was in my role as a leader, which I wasn't a leader at Intuit
Okay.
in a technical sense. Player coach, yes, but
Hmm.
official leader, no. But when I did become a leader and had hiring ability, those were the things that I was looking for. I mean, of course, there is. Most people that come into a sales role at the level that I was leading at, which was outside AEs for large corporations, law firms, et cetera, they have some sales experience. It just may not be in the industry. It may not be in the software space. It may not be X, Y, and Z. So this was a little easier of an exercise, right? You have sales experience. That's fine. But now when I pit your sales experience and the years there versus this applicant who has many more years of sales experience, now I'm starting to dive down into like, what are the soft skills that are there? Where did they come from? Can you articulate how they translate into this role? And so I was always doing that. I was never a solo hirer, right? So hiring in the organization I was in was by committee.
Hmm.
Of course, I could push for, and I did in several cases, push for the rationale for why I would hire this person over that person. But it was always in the back of my mind the need to say and live, we hire for aptitude, attitude, and skill last. Actually walk that out. And that's really the disconnect. So
Hmm.
if you hear an organization or you hear people really tout aptitude, which is the ability to acquire the knowledge, learn it, and apply it. Attitude, mindset, EQ, all of these things. How do you see the world and life and people? And then skill, which is how much information do you have about this particular industry? If that's the priority, then I think organizations largely have done a horrible job at actually sticking to those through the hiring process.
Hmm. Makes
My
sense.
goal was to stick to it.
Yeah, for sure, for sure.
Yeah.
So let's jump forward to Seismic. Tell me your role at Seismic,
Mhm.
and then we'll have some questions from there.
Sure. Yeah. So at Seismic, I'm an individual contributor. The title is Senior Director of Global Sales. Ultimately, I'm an AE, essentially for some of our most strategic and largest customers that I work with. And my goal is to help them, supercharge their marketing efficiency and sales effectiveness.
Going all the way back now for a minute, when you
Hmm.
were being raised by a mom who had you at 15 and had three jobs, and like you said, you made it out, so to speak, of a really difficult situation. Um,
Yeah.
what skills and traits do you have inherently, right, that are innate now as you're
Hmm.
going through your own sales process, your own daily challenges that almost are, like I said, almost like a muscle that's been exercised, where you're able to see things through a little bit more clearly, or more clear headed, or where, maybe someone who hadn't had that life experience, or had let's say, develop the muscles of resiliency,
Yeah.
might struggle with. What do you typically fall back on when you're going through a challenging situation?
Yeah, well, my whole life was challenged, right? So like, there's, I don't, challenge and difficulty and stress, um, are ways of life, or were ways of life in my upbringing, right? So like, those things don't move me in the same way that I've seen them, move. I'm moved by them. Don't, I'm not a robot. I am a human with emotions, but ultimately my ability to compartmentalize things in such a way that I can move forward effectively in the direction that I need to is something that I owned growing up, right? That's something that I saw my mom able to do. My dad was president, so I saw my dad able to do this at different levels as well. My dad was a door-to-door insurance salesman, right? Up until 19, from 1977 when I was 2 years old up until I was probably like 16. And so I saw, what it looks like to be rejected. I saw response to rejection. I myself uh, almost inherited and was conditioned and taught by my surroundings what it looks like to take a loss and bounce back from that loss. Um, you know, uh, just the struggles that we went through economically and things like that, the ups and the downs. One month is everything's phenomenal, one month everything is very, very scarce. These sorts of things that happen in the sales world on a day-to-day basis move me differently, right? I'm activated to action in some places where others might be paralyzed by fear and anxiety, right? And so these are some of the things that I picked up just growing up as traits to move through life and to navigate through this world as at that time a young black man, right? A young black man growing up in a I've had challenges in the school systems that I came up in, and I've had familial issues that I've seen play out in various ways. Like I've had to be a little bit more observant in scenarios and situations on a regular basis. So uh, reading people and reading attitudes and what we now know as EQ, these are things that are necessary for survival in certain environments. And in other environments, they get owned a little bit later because they've not been necessary for coping or for survival. So like all of these things matter as I think about who I've become today and why I might experience some success in this field. Um, you know, framing. My mom used to say to me when I was young, she used to say, DeJuan, you can say anything in the world to me that you want to, as long as you frame it properly. And when I was young, I was just like, what are you talking about, ma? I have no idea what she's talking about. I knew what she meant. I better respect her no matter what I'm trying to convey. But as I grew, I started to understand what she said is actually true, right? So I can press. When you say no, I can press if I frame it properly. When you say don't call me again, I can respond to that and get you and in some cases actually get you to engage in a conversation if I frame it properly. So I learned that framing is everything in communication, and there's nothing I can't say if I feel it. I just have to think thoroughly about how I frame it.
You mentioned something that's a really cool phrase, activate to action. Give me a sense of when you are in a stressful situation or a challenge and you activate to action. And what does that look like for you?
Yeah. So that comes from some things like that come from some stories that I could tell. We could talk about those offline. But some of the environments and situations that I found myself in as I was growing up into manhood, you either activate the action or you perish, right?
Mm.
Like in terms of just the scenarios that I've seen and the places that I've been in. I can take it to a work environment where I'm waiting tables. I just got a 4 top, which is 4 people. I just got an 8 top, which is 8 people, and then maybe the hostess is trying to be a little bit a little bit wants to exact revenge on me for something I don't know. Then all of a sudden I get another 20 top, right? Most I've seen servers walk out of the building and quit their jobs when stuff like that happens. I just say, okay, let me think about this. All right, this is what I'm going to do, right? And I go and make things happen. I make it go.
Mhm.
I make it work. Like that. That sort of make it work instinct is something I don't think I don't think that's a. It may be a skill that you acquire, but if you have it when you get into a position to need it, as opposed to having to acquire it last minute, I think you're just better off.
Fascinating, absolutely fascinating. All right, so I alluded to your ability and the way that you tell stories or use stories in selling in your sales
Hmm.
process. Tell me a little bit about that and what we talked about before we hit record a couple of weeks ago is that if you are managing a complex sales process and actually
Hmm.
and articulate for me what that means at Seismic, a complex sales process, and then
Hmm.
when there are, I'll tease it, I guess, but when there are multiple people involved in order to make it happen, how are you
Hmm.
able to activate them into action, so to speak,
Right.
and get everybody moving in the same direction so that there is a successful outcome and you through the use of stories?
Yeah, I think those are all important. I mean, I think to answer the first question around what constitutes a complex sale,
Mm,
I think you alluded to it that there's complexity introduced in just the sheer volume of people that need to be involved. That's on the buyer side and on the seller side. There's no such thing as a self-made deal, as it were. And so you have to have um, not only not only do you want people on your side within your organization to come to bring their skill sets to bear in a sales cycle or process, but you have to bring them into the story to compel them to be as excited about it as you are in some cases, right? And then the same thing on the other side when you talk about the buyer side, the complexity of how many people need to be involved in a deal. It makes perfect sense that many people have to be involved, but at some level, there needs to be something that's transferable so that the internal sale can begin to happen through champions, through coaches, through advocates within the organization. And the simplest way to make that possible is through a story, right? Like if I convey to you a story that makes perfect sense, resonates, and addresses how we solve the problems that you all have, then that story you can tell. It's almost like, you know, uh, it's almost like the tales within, you know, the Native American culture. The way that their history continued to go forward was through story,
Hmm.
right? And the reason that, you know, a young lady who has recently passed away, in my community, you know, we homeschool our kids, and we were going through Native American history here in our history class, and she was telling all of these rich, beautiful stories that are written nowhere, but yet 50 years later, right, she's able to convey the stories that convey the history of her people in North Carolina, and with such clarity. And that is what story does. It enables people to get to rally around a particular thing. It resonates at a deep internal emotional level, and it's easier to convey externally when you need to. And so that's important at every level of the process: internal buy-in, external buy-in from the client or the buyer, and the buyer's ability, the person who actually wants the solution, their ability to convey in a beautiful and compelling way to the organization why it is that they want to buy what they want to buy.
Most people would immediately go to, in their minds, as I'm thinking about people listening to this, customer stories or referenceable accounts and those types of things. I don't think that's what you're talking about. Do you have an example of either internally or externally where you've painted a picture or told a story in a way that you can share with us that we can frankly remember to pass on to somebody else?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's good. Yeah, I think, you know, I'll speak about how I've tried to practically engage internal partners for work on particular things, right?
Okay.
So let's take there's a story that's behind, and actually, let me go back to a different role. So there's a story around a differentiation case
Mhm,
for the software that I was selling versus the competitors in this space.
mhm,
There were some things that I didn't believe were being, I thought, man, we could really key in on this thing because no one else does this thing. But in all of the materials I see, and all of the brochures and all the ways that we're talking about our place in the market, this thing is not being mentioned. And so the story that I went to marketing with, the story that I went to my leadership with, the story that I went to product with was, hey, you all have built this marvelous thing, but imagine this world, the world in which we start early and often conveying this differential as a key in making decisions about this type of software, period. Not waiting until we get to a place where we're having a deeply technological conversation about the architecture of the software to then bring in someone to explain this differential. How then can we take that technical difference that usually is reserved for late stage conversations and bring it to the forefront so that even your earliest sellers in their career have the ability to differentiate from conversation one? Imagine this, right? Having a conversation with a prospect and saying to them, listen, I know you're in the market and you're looking at various solutions. Here's the question I need to ask you. How important to you and your organization is this thing? Right? Every organization we've spoken to, when we get to the fourth or fifth conversation and we bring in engineers and so forth, they speak highly about the importance of this particular capability. Yet our early sellers don't even say anything about it. Can we possibly bring material to bear? Can we bring a talk track to bear? Can we bring some experts in to help explain it in a very simple manner so that every first conversation now includes this differentiation and later sets minds for any competitor coming into the space? Can we do that? Now, that doesn't sound like a story to you, right? Because there's really no beginning, middle, and end. But that's the story. And as people hear it, I don't know what's happening inside of you as you hear that, but like when people hear that story, typically there's like, I get it. Yes, that makes sense,
mhm.
right? Because of the format and the way that I presented it. And then they rally around and they say, yes, let's do that. How do we actually get that done? and then we continue on with the story so that we can actually map that story to content. We can map that story to graphics. We can map that story to training, and we can then enable the field to be able to tell that story early and often.
And then how do you get the attention of, if, let's say, for instance, somebody from product or
Mhm.
solutions consultants or something like that, where they're strapped, they're busy,
Mhm.
they've got their own priorities and they've got other people telling their, well, probably not the stories the way that DeJuan Brown can tell it, but they're they're
Right.
they're trying to, let's put it this way, they're trying to make their case for why they should have
Sure.
their attention. Um, Tell me about, you mentioned your team in terms of naming, giving your team's name and things like
That's
that,
right.
making sure that
That's right.
everybody's, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So, internally at the last company where I was in a leadership role, um, of AEs, the first thing I did when I got the team was almost a sort of a hodgepodge. The region was a newly created region, and some of the team members were being pulled from other regions to join this team. So already you have sort of a chemistry distraction, right? They're used to working with a particular leader. They're used to working with particular colleagues, and now we've pulled them into one team and called it this new region. And so the first thing I did when I came in, I was like, from here on, we're the squad, right? That's what it was. We're the squad, and I would never refer to us as the regional name of the team. I never did that internally. I never did that out to leadership. It was always the squad. And what that did was it created an identity for us, and it gave us all something bigger to work towards and work for, such that we get to end the quarters, and I'd literally have people phone calls and texts from people on the squad, and they would just be like, how's the squad doing for the quarter? Do we need anything? I can go and try to pull this deal in from next quarter to this quarter, like, and they'd already hit their number. And so it was because there was this singular identity. Even though we were all distributed, people were in different parts of the country. There was this singular identity that we could rally around, and know that it was bigger than just in us as individuals. And so, something as simple as naming, and giving an identity to, and having a mantra. Learn, teach, learn was our mantra there. That's the same mantra that I carried into the sales for the culture, sub community for sales leaders, right? Learn, teach, learn. This is what we're here to do, and we want to be clear that we can do that in a transparent space. I brought Slack to that organization for our particular squad, and we would have candid conversations and feedback sessions within there. And I would take those concerns, and in order to move barriers while protecting their brand, I would frame their asks and sometimes it was complaints, sometimes it was things that they were really not happy about, and I would say, hey, let's bring it all to the squad. And then what I'll do as your leader is I will take those concerns, I will frame them up in a way that might actually get us to where we want to go from your concern, right? And so it was just this space where people felt like this is we're one unit, we do things together, we're safe within this unit. There's that psychological safety. We can say anything we want, even if we have trouble framing it properly. DeJuan, as our leader, will frame it for us. Our brand is protected, our problems are solved, and the barriers are removed. So it was just this one team, oneness aspect to the way that we did things as the squad. And when we went to national sales meeting, we all had T-shirts on that said, the name of our region on the front and the squad on the back. I was that serious about it. I bought T-shirts for the squad.
Do you teach your team and your peers, so to speak, that whole thought process around storytelling and framing conversations and framing ideas? Is that something that you've worked into, I guess, in the past into your sales training and maybe now in sales for the culture?
I do to a degree, right? I try to exhibit it, right?
Mhm.
So there's when especially when questions come where someone is seeking just a black and white answer. My goal in that situation is to really just say, hey, I don't have the answer for you, but here's how I want to help you think about it, right? So it's less about like, here are the tactics, and it's more about here's the picture of where we're trying to go, and here's the picture of what we anticipate is happening inside the person that we're speaking with, and
Mhm.
here's the situation we anticipate happening within the business. And so here are the things that we want to learn, and here's a framework for maybe how to go and acquire that. Now you do that as J Webb, run it back for me, right? And then
Hmm.
and then that actually fosters the level of thought and ownership, but also it helps to practice the story, the framing, in the mind of the person that's actually doing the talking, that wants to do that. Now, do I teach that intentionally? I think I do if I have leadership capability, if I have leadership responsibility. I had two people on my team when I was leading who really wanted to move into leadership. And so what I did was I said, every 2 weeks, we're just going to get together in person when we could do that. They travel to the office. I'd go up to the office and we'd sit in a room and we talk about framing. We talk about story. We talk about idea casting, like vision casting. We talk about all of these big ideas and how to bring them down to the ground level so that people could be attracted to it, and people could resonate with it, and things like that. So these are things that I really really focus on and key on, even over and against some of the tactical X's and O's of the sales game.
Yeah, you even with learn, teach, learn, what you said a couple of minutes ago with that example that you just gave me, that was really an example in real time about learn, teach, learn. It's like, this is how I would, this is how I would suggest, you might want to think about it, roll it back to me, right? So it's like a teaching,
Right.
you learn, you learned, teach it to them, and then they teach it back to you, right? And
That's right.
absolutely. What about underperformers?
Hmm.
People that are challenged and for one reason or another just aren't making the number or just haven't been doing well.
Hmm.
This idea of telling stories and painting larger pictures.
Hmm.
Um, do you use that as well in those particular cases, or tell me about that?
Yeah. You know, first there's a thousand reasons at minimum that a person might be underperforming,
Hmm.
right? And so it's not, for me, it's never been like, all right, this is the number you were supposed to hit, you didn't hit that number, do more activity, or or make more visits, or
Right.
go on more sales calls, or whatever the case might be. So first, just knowing the person, understanding what's going on in your life, what's
Mm.
going on in your family, what's going on at home, like what are you thinking? And then after we move past that as a relationship, right, this is a human, there's a variety of things that could be happening. So after we get through some of that and start to understand what might be shaping what this person is now telling themselves, and so now we're talking about, what story are you telling yourself
Hmm.
about your performance, and is it true?
Mm.
Right? So like, why do you think you're having this sort of trouble? Like, just explain, lay it out for me in as frank a way as possible. And then as I've heard in some cases, the stories that people are telling themselves and relying on as true, and then acting on or not acting on, often I just find, disjoints between what's true and what they believe in at that moment. And in that moment, absolutely, there's a better story. Here's the true story. Like, remember first quarter, when you and I were speaking, and you were telling me how excited you were, and you were telling me all about these deals that you were working, and how you were going on these meetings, and how people were relating to you and things like that. Like, that's the true story. That's who you
Mm.
actually are,
Mm.
right? This performance right here for this particular quarter doesn't define who you are, and I think you're believing that it does define who you are. Are you? Do you
Mm.
think that this is you now?
Mm.
Or can we go back historically and look at what's actually you, and what the outcomes were at that point? How do we get back there? Can you help me?
Right.
Right? Teach me how you believe you can get back there, and what part I play so that I can play my part and get you there. Right? It is story. It's
Mm.
just like, what stories do you believe from yourself? What stories that the clients or prospects are telling you that you believe or reject? What story is leadership telling you that you believe or reject? What stories are being told to you about you and your family that you believe or reject? All of that, when you synthesize all of that, you get the outcome of a person's attitude about the work that they're doing and their ability to do it. Right? And it's really the same when you think about imposter syndrome. It's just a belief in stories that probably aren't true. You take them as true, and you respond to them as their reality.
Yeah, and I think the baseline there is self-awareness, right? In other words, to be able to be aware of oneself and understand, where you are or where you were or where you have been, to be able to even start to begin to tell that story, to understand that story, and then be able to tell either that story or a new story.
That's right. And the freedom, the psychological freedom to say, this is what I believe about myself and where I am today,
Mm.
in the context of a community who cares for you. Now, this is another concept I talk about often. It's having a community of unflinching friends, right? People who can hear anything from you. They don't flinch. They just address it. They acknowledge it. They address it. They help you. And if you can have a community that you can rely on to bring, even in the moment when hey, I know I'm believing a lie, but this is what I feel about my ability to actually fulfill this role, and these are the reasons why I'm believing that right now. And you have a community that'll rally behind you to tell you the truth about who you are and what you've been able to do and what you're capable of going forward. That's the magic, right? That's the magic. This is not something we can do in a vacuum. Even if you're the most self-aware person in the universe, you need community because they're mirrors to you. They can see things that you can't see. They're identifiers of your blind spots. And if they're unflinching friends within that community, they are course correctors, right? And so you have to have that. And that's what Sales for the Culture is. And there are a couple other communities that I run in that are full of unflinching friends who will tell you the truth about yourself for your betterment and improvement, but also for your growth and correction. It's not all soft.
Well, that's what I was going to ask, right? For sure. And it
Yeah.
sounds like obviously sales for the culture is a good example. You mentioned the others. It sounds to me like that's something that you've um, intentioned or you've sought out intentionally, right? You've cultivated these folks around you.
Yeah, well, so that I entered into the community, right? This was so
Mm,
when you think about how Sales for the Culture even started from the ground, like I mean, Morgan Ingram had a deep desire to do this, and he put out a LinkedIn post with a video saying, "Man, I'm just going to do it. This is needed. I'm going to create this community. It's a Slack community for Black people." So that we can be seen and celebrated, but also help learn amongst one another and just have a place where we're free to talk
mm,
and free to communicate with one another. And so that's how the Slack group started.
mm,
And I jumped quickly on that opportunity to join that Slack group, and then it's morphed and grown
mm,
into the leadership that's there today. When you think about Nikki Ivy and Marcus Knight and Larry Long Jr. and Roderick Jefferson and you know it's so many, Jacob Geberwald and these folks who are leading the charge over there, Nathan Crafts, right? Who are leading the charge within this group and have caught that same vision and have that same desire and want that same freedom and community. I just happen to have been one who recognized my own need for it, jumped in and have been surrounded by other people who understand the same.
yeah, that's I'm happy to be surrounded by you. Be a part of you for,
I appreciate it.
for sure, for sure. Well, let's get into what I call the rapid fire five, where I'm asking you 5 questions, give me 5 answers, and we'll wrap it up after that. Sound good?
All right. Yeah, that sounds good.
Do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
Yeah, I mean, I have a truncated morning routine. I have to work out every morning very early. The other part of my routine is I wake up around 4:30 in the morning. And beyond that, beyond waking up at 4:30 and then going to work out really hard, there's no other parts to that routine that are practiced. I do whatever I want.
I need to
Nobody's
know
up.
what the flip. Let me ask you the other side of that. What time is bedtime? What time do you actually go to sleep if you're getting up?
Between 10 and 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
What are you most excited about right now, personally and professionally?
Personally, I'm most excited about my family, right? So my 16-year-old son right now is moving into the 11th grade, and he is going to do community college full time while juggling a couple high school classes. And his goal is to get his associate's degree by the end of 12th grade. I'm really excited about that. I'm also really excited about. I have 4 daughters, and I'm just excited about the fact that all my kids want to stay home until they're in their 30s. They love us, and that's exciting to me to see the fact that my wife and I have raised kids that actually want to be around us 24 hours a day.
Love
So
it.
that's personal.
Yeah,
Um,
that means you're doing something right. Yep.
on the business side, yeah, like or on outside of the personal life, I'm most excited about what I'm seeing in Sales for the Culture. I'm super excited for what I see in the industry at large and the start the growing recognition of the benefits of diversity besides optics. The investment that organizations in the tech space are putting into diversifying, and the fact that it's moved beyond performative into, the economic realm with C-suites supporting these efforts.
What do you want to get better at right now?
Tactical, right? So everything I told you. So telling stories, being able to convey messages and move people through them is something that I've owned for a very, very long time. But I also want to start getting into the X's and O's quite a bit more. I want to start getting into data quite a bit more. And I want to start learning quite a bit more about marketing.
What keeps you motivated?
Whew. What keeps me motivated? I got 6 kids. I don't know of a better better motivator than that. To take Biggie's old line, he says, "I got kids to feed." Right. So like that's a real motivator. But also, man, just like serving people and helping people and seeing up close and personal, like the impact that you're able to make on people's lives and businesses, lives first, businesses second, is an extraordinary motivator for me.
If I go, you got to go.
Right. There you go. That's right.
What's your preference for consuming information? Is it books? Is it podcasts? What is it?
Yeah, I'm Audible. So like, anything audio. So like I like listening to stuff. So that's my preference. Audible books, podcasts, even videos, right? Video content that I just listen to. I don't necessarily watch the actions of the person.
Right. Absolutely. Well, I'm going to be watching the actions of you, my friend. Activate to action for sure. He said it here. DeJuan Brown, you heard it here first, exclusively on Over Quota. DeJuan, thanks for going over quota. This was fun.
I appreciate it, man. It was fun for me too.
Goodbye, everybody. I'm cueing the music.